Welcome back, everyone, to another deep dive. And today we're going deep, deep into the heart of Burgundy, to the legendary Côte d'Or.
Sounds great.
Yeah. For anyone who loves wine, this is a region, it's almost mythical, right? Like the wines have this incredible reputation, this sort of aura of excellence and history. And we're going to try to break down why that is.
Yeah, absolutely. And you've really gathered some fascinating sources for this deep dive. I mean, we've got material that covers the really ancient history of grape growing there, going all the way to, what makes these wines taste the way they do. Even like suggestions for what foods you might pair them with.
Yeah, we've got the full picture here.
I love it, a complete picture.
Yeah, the whole story. And so our mission really is to try to extract the most interesting parts of that and really understand why the Côte d'Or is so special in the world of wine. So let's maybe start at the very beginning with the historical roots of this region. Where does it all begin?
Well, the sources really point to the Benedictine and Cistercian monks. Centuries ago, these monks, they weren't just any old farmers. They were incredibly dedicated and I think really astute observers. They spent years identifying and selecting what they believed were just the best possible vineyard sites. And really, that's kind of where the whole concept of climates comes from.
It's amazing to think, these monks. I mean, they were obviously trying to sustain themselves. They were trying to, produce wine, not only for sustenance but also for religious purposes.
Exactly.
But they were so focused on finding the perfect spot for those vines. It wasn't just a matter of like, okay, here's some sunny land. Let's plant some grapes. They were really zoning in on these subtle variations in the land. Was it simply, do you think, a quest to make the perfect communion wine, or was there something even deeper there, like an intuitive understanding of how the land's character would actually show up in the wine itself?
That's a really, really interesting question. And I think while their immediate needs were definitely practical, they needed the wine for certain purposes, the fact that they went to such lengths with their observations and record keeping, which they did for generations, right? Like they were passing down this knowledge over time. That suggests to me that there was a real intellectual curiosity and maybe even a dawning understanding of how closely intertwined place and wine actually are. So yeah, it was more than just farming. It was almost like an early form of terroir study.
Right, almost like a proto-science developing there, yeah.
Exactly, exactly.
And it wasn't just about finding the right spots. The sources also emphasize that these monastic orders were really, they were innovators when it came to actually growing the grapes. They
Right.
were developing techniques, right?
Absolutely. They pioneered these really rigorous pruning methods, thinking carefully about how to shape each individual vine. And they also grasped the concept of yield control, which even back then was a pretty big deal. I mean, focusing on quality rather than just quantity, that was a major shift in the region's history, really a turning point.
It really is. So, okay, we see the seeds of quality being sown by these religious orders, but then how did things evolve as we move past the monastic period? Who started owning the vineyards, and how were these hard-won traditions actually preserved?
Well, there was a gradual shift, according to the sources. We see the land going from the nobility to families, to wine-growing families who really dedicated themselves to these plots of land. And what's remarkable is that these families, generation after generation, they actually continued to honor and build upon the practices that had been established, by those who came before them. So this deep connection to specific plots, to those climates, and this inherited wisdom about how to cultivate them, that's really been essential in keeping the character of those wines so unique. It's like the direct line, from the monks all the way to modern-day winemakers.
Wow, it's incredible to think about that kind of that lineage, that direct connection to the past. And then, of course, in the 20th century, we see things really become official, right? We see the AOC system being established. So how did the Côte d'Or, with its already, amazing reputation, how did it fit into this new legal framework?
Well, the AOC, the Appellation d'Origine Control A system, was a huge step for Burgundy, right? It was basically taking centuries of knowledge and tradition and kind of codifying them into law.
Yeah.
And the Côte d'Or, with its very clearly defined vineyard sites and its long history of quality, it naturally became a core part of this system. The AOC provided a legal structure to really protect the quality and the authenticity of Burgundy wines, laying out very clear rules about everything, what grapes you could grow, how much wine could be produced from a specific area, and crucially, this included the individual climates of the Côte d'Or. So that gives you, the consumer a real assurance of what you're actually getting when you see that AOC label.
Right. It's like a guarantee of origin and a certain level of quality then.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've got the historical roots, right? We've got the monks, the meticulous observation, the climate, these dedicated families, and then the AOC system to kind of protect it all. So now let's actually dive into the terroir itself. What are the elements that make the terroir of the Côte d'Or so unique and so influential?
Well, it's like a puzzle, right?
Huh.
It's made up of several different pieces. And the first one is climate. The Côte d'Or has a continental climate, which means cold winters and warm summers. And this seasonal change, that back and forth, that's actually really crucial because it allows both Pinot Noir and Chardonnay, the two major grapes of the region, it allows them to ripen slowly. And that slow ripening, that's what helps them develop these incredibly complex flavors and aromas.
Yeah.
But of course, it's not all sunshine and roses, right? This kind of climate also has its downsides. There's always the risk of frost in the spring or hail in the summer, and that can really damage the harvest.
So there's this inherent risk. It's not it's not a factory. It's a real negotiation with nature, right?
It really is.
And then there's the lay of the land, the famous slope. Everyone talks about the slope of the Côte d'Or.
Exactly. The slope itself is crucial, and most of it faces east and southeast. So that means the vines get the best possible sunlight throughout the day, which is, of course, essential for the grapes to ripen fully. And the slope also provides natural drainage so the soil doesn't get waterlogged. And then, to top it off, you've got the Morvan Hills to the west. They act as a natural windbreak, protecting the vines from those harsh westerly winds. So it's like the Côte d'Or is this perfectly situated little haven for grapes, really.
A little slice of grape paradise there.
Exactly.
And then, of course, there's what's underneath all that, the soil itself, the bedrock. Limestone is, it's almost synonymous with Burgundy.
It really is.
Yeah.
And most of the soils in the Côte d'Or are limestone and clay limestone. But here's where it gets even more interesting. There are actually subtle variations within those soil types. There are different types of limestone, like Combe Blanchenne and Primo limestone, and those differences, even though they seem small, they actually impact the taste of the wine.
Yeah.
It's thought that they contribute to those mineral notes that people often talk about when they're describing Burgundy wines. Like you're actually tasting the bedrock in the glass.
It's amazing. And the amount of clay, that seems to be another big factor, and especially when we start distinguishing between the red wines and the white wines.
Right. Clay is really important, especially in the north, in the Côte de Nuit, where they focus more on Pinot Noir. Clay helps the soil hold moisture, and it provides a lot of nutrients that are really good for the vines, and that ultimately contributes to the complexity of those red wines. In the south, in the Côte de Beaune, you find more marl, which is a mixture of clay and limestone. And that's thought to be part of what gives those Chardonnays their finesse, their elegance, and their minerality. Right. So yeah, it's all about those tiny variations, even within a pretty small area.
Yeah, it really is. So let's talk about those two main areas now, the Côte de Nuit and the Côte de Beaune. They're often described as having very different personalities in terms of the wines they produce.
Oh, absolutely.
What are those key differences?
Okay, so up north you've got the Côte de Nuit, and that's Pinot Noir country. People often call it the kingdom of Pinot Noir. It's famous worldwide for these red wines that they're structured, they're intense, they're really complex, and they can age for a really long time. Think of villages like Gevrey-Chambertin, known for power, for really complex wines. Vosne-Romanée, known for its elegance, its finesse. Then you've got Chambon-Musigny, famous for its delicacy, its floral notes. And then New Saint-Georges, often a bit more robust, but more earthy. And of course, the Côte de Nuit is also home to some of the most legendary Grand Cru vineyards in the entire world, like Chambertin and Romanée-Conti. Those names are known by wine lovers everywhere.
They really are. And then as we, kind of head south to the Côte de Beaune, the picture kind of broadens, right? We start seeing more and more variety.
Yes, exactly. It's a more diverse picture. You still get excellent Pinot Noir there, but it's especially celebrated for its Chardonnay. Villages like Pouligny-Montrachet and Chassagne-Montrachet, they're famous for their white wines. They have this incredible combination of minerality and this sort of richness, this opulence. And then you've got Meursault. Those wines are known for being even richer. with more of those nutty, buttery flavors. But the Côte de Beaune doesn't just do whites. It also produces some really great reds in places like Pomar, which is known for its structure and intensity. And then Volnay, where the Pinot Noir is a bit more delicate and elegant. And of course, it has its own Grand Cru vineyards for Chardonnay, including the very prestigious Montrachet and Côte and Charlemagne.
So we've got these two major regions, right? Each with its own personality, its own specialties, and underpinning all of it is this concept of climate. We've talked about it a little bit, but I want to make sure we really understand why it's so central to Burgundy and especially to the Côte d'Or.
Yeah, the climate, it's much more than just a vineyard, right? It's more than just a plot of land. It's a very, very specifically defined area that has a really unique combination of geological features, climatic conditions, and a historical track record of producing wines with a very specific character. So these climates, they've been identified, they've been demarcated over centuries, really, of observation and experience.
So it's almost like each climate has its own, its own DNA, its own winemaking DNA, which gives it this very specific personality.
Exactly. That's a great way to put it. And even those climates that are right next to each other, even though they might share, broadly the same climate and even soil type, they can produce wines that are remarkably different. Like they can be totally different in aroma, in taste, in structure.
Yeah.
And that's the real beauty of Burgundy, right? That's the core of the belief in terroir. The idea that the land itself is a primary factor, a primary voice in the wine.
Do you have any specific examples of how this plays out, in the glass? Like how two different climates can lead to two very different wines.
Oh, absolutely. For example, if you take Pinot Noir from the Chambertin Grand Cru, you often find that it's a really powerful wine. It's got those dark fruit notes, and it's built to age. It's very structured. But then if you compare that to a Pinot Noir from Musigny Grand Cru, which is pretty close by, that's often more elegant. It might have more red fruit, some floral notes, and a silkier texture. So even though they're geographically close, they're very different wines. And for Chardonnay, think about a Montrachet Grand Cru. That's often really rich and complex with lots of citrus, butter, hazelnut. But then you compare that to a Chardonnay from the Puligny Montrachet Cru Les Pucelles, and that one's often more mineral, more delicate, more floral. And it's all because of those very specific climate differences.
And this whole system, this hierarchy of climates, it's really reflected in the way Burgundy classifies its wines, right?
Exactly. The classification system isn't, it's not random. It's based on this deep understanding of the climates. The Grand Cru vineyards, those are the ones that throughout history have consistently produced the very best wines, the most exceptional wines. And then you have the Premier Cru vineyards, which are also excellent, really high quality, lots of finesse. And then you have village wines, which come from broader areas within specific villages, and they're a good expression of that village's overall style. And then you have the regional wines, which come from even larger areas. Those are usually lighter, fresher, a bit more approachable, maybe a good entry point into Burgundy wines.
So we've got the land, the terroir, which is clearly fundamental. But what about the human element? How do the actual grape growing practices in the Côte d'Or contribute to the quality? How do they work with what nature's given them?
Well, the way they grow grapes in the Côte d'Or is very much tailored to Pinot Noir and Chardonnay. Both of those grapes bent fairly early in the season, which of course makes them vulnerable to those late spring frosts. And Pinot Noir especially, it's a bit of a diva. It's got those thin skins, those tightly packed bunches, so you have to be really careful in the vineyard to prevent disease. Chardonnay is a little bit more adaptable, but you still need to treat it right to get the best out of it, to really express that terroir.
And what are some of the specific techniques that growers are using in the vineyards themselves? Like, how does that play out?
Well, it's very hands-on. It's very meticulous. You see a lot of pruning techniques like simple and double. These are techniques that really balance the growth of the vine, the way it grows with how much fruit it's producing. And then there's yield control, which is really crucial. They often do things like green harvesting, which means they remove some of the grape bunches while the grapes are still growing so the remaining ones can get more concentrated in flavor. And cluster thinning, which is similar, but it happens closer to harvest. And then you have things like plowing to aerate the soil, using cover crops to keep the soil healthy, and using organic fertilizers. And then there's canopy management, which involves things like removing leaves to make sure that the grapes get enough sunlight and airflow, which helps to prevent disease.
It sounds like a real a real labor of love, right? This back and forth with nature.
Yeah.
And with those delicate grapes and the sometimes unpredictable weather, I imagine there are a lot of challenges that the growers have to face.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, besides the frost and the hail, there are fungal diseases to worry about, mildew, oidium, rot, especially in years when it's damp.
Hmm.
And of course, there's climate change. It's having a real impact, and it's forcing the growers to adapt their traditional practices, which is never easy.
Yeah, but it sounds like there's also a positive shift, right, towards more environmentally friendly practices, more sustainability.
Exactly. And the sources really highlight this. There's a real movement towards sustainability, towards organic agriculture, even biodynamic agriculture.
Hmm.
People are really starting to understand how important it is to preserve the land, to make
Right.
sure it's healthy for future generations. And a lot of them are actively changing their practices to minimize their impact, to protect the environment. So we've got this amazing land, dedicated growers. Now let's go into the winery, right? Let's talk about the actual winemaking, the art of winemaking in the Côte d'Or. How about we start with Pinot Noir? How do they typically handle that grape?
Well, the process often begins with a period of what's called cold pre-fermentation maceration. So that's before the fermentation even starts. They crush the grapes and then they keep them cold for a bit. And that helps to extract more of the color and the aromas from the skins. Then the fermentation itself usually takes place in stainless steel tanks or sometimes these open wooden vats. And they carefully control the temperature, keeping it somewhere between, say, 25 and 30 degrees Celsius. And during fermentation, these various techniques to manage the extraction of tannins and color. They might do remontage, which means pumping the juice from the bottom of the tank back over the cap of skins, or pidgeage, which is basically punching down that cap. And some winemakers, they even use whole grape clusters, which can add complexity and structure to the wine. And then once fermentation is done, they typically age the wine in French oak barrels for a year or two, sometimes even longer. And the amount of new oak that they use, that depends on the style they're going for. And then after the barrel aging, there might be some additional aging in the bottle before the wine is released.
So Pinot Noir is one thing, but Chardonnay, the other star of the Côte d'Or, that must be treated differently, right? I mean, it's a very different grape.
Oh, yes, absolutely. With Chardonnay, they usually start by pressing the whole grapes very gently, to get the juice out without getting too much tannin from the skins. And the fermentation can happen in those French oak barrels, again, with careful temperature control, or sometimes in stainless steel tanks if they want to keep the wine, fresher, more focused on the fruit. And there's a technique called buttonage. It's basically stirring the lees, which is the sediment of dead yeast cells that settles at the bottom of the barrel. And that's done to give the Chardonnay more texture, more complexity. And then there's malolactic fermentation, which softens the acidity of the wine. That's pretty common, but not always done. And then, just like Pinot Noir, the Chardonnay is usually aged in those French oak barrels for a similar amount of time. And then, again, maybe some additional bottle aging.
So the winemaker is really like a conductor, right? They're guiding these natural processes, trying to get the perfect expression of the terroir.
That's a great analogy. They
Yeah.
really are like conductors. They're making decisions about acidity, about tannins, about how much alcohol is in the wine, how much fruit they want to emphasize. And the goal is usually to make a wine that tastes good right now, but also has the structure to age, to become even more complex over time.
Right. And our sources also mention something really interesting about indigenous yeasts, the yeasts that are naturally present on the grapes themselves and how they play a role in the winemaking process.
Yes. And it's something that's gaining more and more attention. There's a growing awareness that these indigenous yeasts, they actually contribute to the unique character, to the subtle flavors of Côte d'Or wines. It's like another aspect of the terroir, right? The microbes that are naturally present in the vineyard, they're also leaving their mark on the wine. So it's not just the soil, the climate, it's even the microscopic life that's contributing to that sense of place, that authenticity.
So we got this incredible base, right? We've got the terroir, we've got the growers, we've got the winemakers.
Yeah.
How does all of this actually translate to the experience of drinking these wines? Let's talk about sensory profiles. Like
Yeah.
what does a typical Côte d'Or Pinot Noir actually taste like? What should we be looking for in the glass?
Well, when it's young, a Pinot Noir from the Côte d'Or, it will usually have these really vibrant aromas of fresh red fruit, like cherry, raspberry, strawberry. And often you get these really delicate floral notes as well, like rose or violet. And as the wine ages, those fruit aromas, they can become even more complex. They can become jammier, more like dark berries. And then you start to get these savory notes like black pepper, clove, maybe some earthy notes like fallen leaves or mushroom. And then with even more aging, you might get what are called tertiary aromas, things like leather, tobacco, even truffle. And then on the palate, when you actually taste it, you'll get that core of fresh red fruit with this lively acidity and soft to medium tannins. It usually has a light to medium body. And those flavors, they'll often mirror what you're getting on the nose with that spice, that earthiness, that minerality. And the finish, it tends to be long and elegant. So overall, the structure of a good Côte d'Or Pinot Noir is all about balance. It's about refreshing acidity, fine-grained tannins, and often this really distinctive mineral backbone. And all of that, it contributes to its ability to age, to really improve over time.
So Pinot Noir is one side of the coin. What about Chardonnay? How would you describe the sensory profile of a typical Côte d'Or Chardonnay?
Well, when they're young, they often have these beautiful aromas of citrus fruit,
Yeah.
like lemon, lime, and then maybe some white fruit like apple, pear, and again, those floral notes, but this time maybe more like honeysuckle or acacia. And as they age, they can get these richer, more complex aromas, things like butter, brioche, hazelnut, toasted almond, honey, and that mineral note again, that flinty minerality. And then those tertiary notes come in, dried fruit, sweet spice, and on the palate you get those white and citrus fruits with a really vibrant acidity, and the texture can vary. It can be lean and mineral, or it can be richer and creamier depending on how the wine was made. But they tend to have a medium to full body, and again you get that long, elegant finish, often with that minerality coming through. So structurally, they're similar to the Pinot Noir. They have this great balance, that refreshing acidity, but they're a bit more full-bodied. And they usually have a subtle oak influence from the barrel aging. And like the Pinot, they also have really good aging potential.
And how do those different classification levels that we talked about, the Grand Cru, Premier Cru, Village, and Regional, how do those actually show up when you taste the wines? Like, what are the noticeable differences?
Okay, so the Grand Cru wines, the ones that come from those exceptional climatics, those are usually the most concentrated, the most complex, the most intense, and they have the longest aging potential. And then the Premier Cru wines, they're also excellent. They have that extra layer of complexity and finesse compared to the village wines. The village wines they're more approachable when they're young. They're a good example of what that specific village is known for. And then the regional wines, those are usually lighter, fresher, more fruit forward. They're a good introduction to Burgundy, I would say.
Okay, so we've got all this detail, right? The terroir, the grapes, the winemaking, and it all comes together in these amazing wines. And of course, we don't always drink wine on its own. Food and wine, they often go hand in hand. What are some classic pairings, some recommended pairings for Côte d'Or wines?
Well, the wines from the Côte d'Or, they're elegant, they're complex, and that makes them really versatile when it comes to food. And of course, they go beautifully with the traditional food of Burgundy itself. I mean, you can't go wrong with a Boeuf Bourguignon and a structured Pinot Noir from Gevrey-Chambertin, or a Coq au vin with a slightly lighter Pinot from, say, Chambolle-Musigny. And for the whites, escargot, those snails in garlic butter, those are classic with a rich Meursault. And jambon percelé, which is parsleyed ham, that goes really well with a crisp aligoté. And even those cheesy gougères, those little puffs, they're fantastic with a glass of Crémant de Borgonha, the sparkling wine from the region.
Yeah, and beyond those regional specialties, what are some other dishes that you might pair with these wines? Like, what else works well?
Well, you can definitely pair those lighter-bodied Pinot Noirs from places like Volnay with roasted chicken or game birds. Duck confit can be really good with a Pinot from, say, Moray Saint-Denis, which has a bit more structure. And for the whites, grilled whitefish or shellfish, those are great with those mineral Chardonnays from Pouligny-Montrachet. And you might be surprised, but sushi can actually work really well with a lean Chardonnay from Chablis, which is, it's technically not in the Côte d'Or, but it's still part of Burgundy.
So any kind of general rules of thumb, any tips for someone who wants to create their own pairings, with Côte d'Or wines?
Yeah, I think the main thing is to think about the weight and the intensity of both the wine and the food. Acidity in the wine can cut through richness in the food, and tannins in red wines, they can work really well with protein, with meat, and of course, matching the flavors can be great, But don't be afraid to experiment, to try things that might seem a bit unusual. Sometimes those contrasting flavors can be really interesting. At the end of the day, the best pairing is the one that you enjoy the most. It's about personal preference.
We've covered so much ground here. We've really gone deep. So let's take a step back now and look at the Côte d'Or in a bigger context.
Yeah.
Where does it stand in the global wine market? What might the future hold for this legendary region? We talked about the AOC system earlier. How important is that for maintaining the region's reputation and ensuring that the quality remains high?
Oh, the AOC system is absolutely crucial.
Yeah.
It protects the origin, it sets a standard for quality, and it really helps to promote the wines of Burgundy, on a global scale. It gives consumers confidence, and it helps to protect the reputation that these wines have built over centuries, really.
And when we talk about, the top tier of Burgundy, there are certain names that come to mind, right? Certain producers, certain labels that everyone knows. Who are some of those iconic names from the Côte d'Or?
Well, from the Côte de Nuit, you have, the true legends, Domaine de la Romanée-Conti, which everyone just calls DRC, and then Domaine Le Roy, Domaine Amand Rousseau, Domaine Georges Roumier, Domaine Comte Georges de Vaugue. And in the Côte de Beaume, you've got Domaine Le Fleuve, Domaine Coche-Douy, Domaine Jean-François Rouleau, Domaine des Comtes-Lafont, Domaine de Monty, and Bouchard Perrenfields. And of course, those are just a few examples, but these are the producers that are consistently setting the bar. They're the ones that everyone else looks up to.
And what are we seeing right now in terms of how people are drinking these wines, how they're being appreciated globally? What are the trends?
Well, there's definitely a continuing demand for high-quality, terroir-driven wines.
Yeah.
And that's great for the Côte d'Or, right? Because that's what they do best. And people are also becoming more interested in sustainable practices, in organic wines. And then you have these huge growing wine markets in Asia. So that's another big area of growth.
Well, it's not all, sunshine and roses, right? There must be challenges. What are some of the biggest challenges facing the Côte d'Or as it looks to the future?
Well, climate change is a huge one. It's really forcing the growers to think differently, to adapt. And then there's the cost of everything. The land is expensive, production costs are high, so that's a constant pressure. And of course, there's competition. There are other wine regions around the world that are producing amazing wines. And the Côte d'Or has to, it has to keep innovating, it has to keep pushing to stay ahead. And then there's this balancing act. They want to maintain their exclusivity. That's part of what makes them so special. But they also want to make sure that their wines are accessible to a wider audience. It's a tricky thing to get right.
Yeah. And finally, our sources also mentioned the importance of tourism. What role does tourism play in the Côte d'Or?
Tourism is huge for the Côte d'Or. It's a big part of the economy. It creates jobs. It supports local businesses. But it's also a way to promote these wines, to share them with the world. It allows people to come and experience the beauty of the vineyards, to see how the wines are made, to taste them right there where they're produced. And that creates a connection. It helps people to appreciate, to understand these wines even more. And of course, it helps to protect the traditions of the region, to make sure that this knowledge is passed down.
Well, this has been a truly fascinating deep dive. I mean, it's clear that the Côte d'Or, it's not just a place, it's a story. It's a combination of history, geology, climate, and the dedication of generations of people.
I couldn't agree more. It's a unique and irreplaceable terroir. It's a place where centuries of knowledge, centuries of respect for the land, they come together to create these truly exceptional wines.
And it sounds like the future of the Côte d'Or is all about balance, right?
Yeah.
About honoring those traditions, but also being open to new ideas, to innovation.
Oh. Absolutely. And protecting those climates, really understanding and appreciating them, that's crucial. That's the key to understanding Burgundy, to understanding its culture. And